Treasury's Epstein file details, Mr. President, 4,725 wire transfers. Let me repeat that. 4,725 wire transfers, adding up to nearly $1.1 billion flowing in and out of just one of Mr. Epstein's bank accounts.
4,725 wire transfers totaling over $1.00. That's the staggering figure Senator Ron Wyden dropped on the Senate floor as he ripped the cover off a hidden Treasury file tied to Jeffrey Epstein's financial network. And here's the chilling part. This file isn't rumor, it's real. A stack of government records locked away in a cabinet guarded so tightly that only a handful of insiders have ever laid eyes on it. For years, the public was kept in the dark while officials quietly smothered any attempt to drag the truth into daylight. Wyden's demand? Plain transparency. What he exposed wasn't theory. It was raw data, numbers that sketch a story of power, money, and complicity on a scale most people can barely even imagine.
Now, somewhere in the Treasury Department, Mr. President, locked away in a cabinet drawer, is a big Epstein file that's full of actionable information. Follow the money details about his financing and operations that await investigation. Last year, the Biden administration allowed our investigators to look at portions of the file. We did that at the Treasury building. Here is what it says.
Think about it, nearly $1 billion, $100 million, 0 cents pushed through a single account tied directly to Epstein. And this wasn't money trickling out over decades. No, this was thousands of transfers, each one a breadcrumb pointing somewhere. But here's where it gets darker. That kind of movement doesn't look like one man shuffling his fortune. It screams coordination, a network at work. It reeks of money laundering, the kind you'd expect from global crime syndicates. To brush it off is to ignore red flags so bright they're practically burning.
If you ask me, that is more than 4,000 potential lines of investigation right there. Hundreds of millions more flowed through other accounts. That's even a lot more to investigate.
And then there's the destination. Wyden revealed the transfers weren't just circling Wall Street. They were funneled through Russian banks, some now sanctioned for corruption, secrecy, and ties to hostile networks. So the real question is this: why would Epstein, already notorious as a predator, be moving money through institutions with reputations that toxic?
The file shows that Mr. Epstein used multiple Russian banks, which are now under sanctions, to process payments related to sex trafficking. A lot of the women and girls he targeted came from Russia, Belarus, Turkey, and elsewhere. One shudders to think about the kinds of people who must have been involved in trafficking these women and young girls out of those companies and into the Epstein web of abuse. Again, these are all potential leads, Mr. President, the Department of Justice ought to be digging into.
Many of Epstein's victims came from countries like Russia, Belarus, and Turkey, the very same regions tied to those shady bank transfers. That overlap isn't coincidence. These young women didn't just appear out of thin air, they were funneled through a system, a pipeline global in scope, financial at its core. The money trail and the trafficking trail converge, and together they sketch a picture far darker than anyone wanted to admit. But here's the maddening part. Instead of sparking investigations or outrage, the agencies sitting on these files responded with silence, or worse, dismissiveness. When Senator Wyden demanded Congress be given the full file, Treasury replied with a polite, carefully worded brush-off, essentially telling him he already had everything he needed.
Again, these are all potential leads, Mr. President, the Department of Justice ought to be digging into. This is about years and years of international sex trafficking. None of this is a hoax. None of it is a scam. And I'd like to say I consider it insulting to the intelligence of the American people for the Trump administration to simply say there is nothing to investigate here. Now, when the Trump administration came in with a lot of fanfare about transparency and openness, I said, I'm going to follow up on that.
Anyone who knows Washington's playbook recognizes the code. Stop digging, you're not getting more. Wyden himself admitted it was basically the government's way of telling him to kick rocks. But if a senior senator can be stonewalled like that, what chance does the public have of ever seeing what's buried inside those files?
Treasury Secretary Bessent, FBI Director Patel, and I asked them all to produce the Epstein file to the Senate Finance Committee so it could be reviewed. In fact, I've made that request multiple times.
And then comes a name too big to ignore, Pam Bondi. As Florida's Attorney General, she held power in the very state where Epstein carried out some of his most infamous crimes.
Pam Bondi was the Attorney General in the state of Florida, where a lot of the Epstein crimes were committed.
She had the background, the authority, and the insight to understand exactly how serious this case was. And yet, when the chance came to demand answers on the national stage, she didn't take it. She chose silence.
So I'm going to have more follow-up for Attorney General Bondi very quickly. As for today, Mr. President, if she doesn't want to do the investigating, doesn't want the DOJ to do it, let me just restate my original demand.
Instead of demanding accountability, Bondi stood with those who chose secrecy. Instead of protecting victims, she let the cover-up drag on. For someone in her position, that wasn't just a mischance, it was a betrayal of responsibility.
The Trump commitment to transparency, based on the response, didn't mean a whole lot because they just refused. Here's what one Treasury official wrote back to me. I'll quote here. The Department of Treasury has previously made documents available relating to the matter in response to your inquiries. Accordingly, we understand that you have the information you seek from the Treasury related to this request.
This isn't just about one official looking the other way. It's about a system built to shield the powerful. A system that bends, breaks, and caves under the weight of influence, leaving justice and victims pushed aside. Every promise of transparency collapses the second it risks exposing the wrong names. Politicians love to campaign on accountability, but when the spotlight turns toward the elite, those slogans suddenly mean nothing.
Mr. President, for anybody who's familiar with how these discussions go in Washington, D.C., what I just read was code for the bureaucracy saying, you're asking for information, go pound sand.
The very institutions meant to protect the public have instead become barricades for the powerful, the ones least deserving of protection. And who gets left behind? The survivors. Women and girls whose lives were shattered, forced to watch their trauma brushed aside while the network of abusers stays hidden in plain sight. Look closely at the evidence, and a darker possibility emerges. Maybe Epstein wasn't the mastermind at all. Maybe he was just a frontman in a vast machine, a network that crossed borders, banks, and powerful institutions. The Treasury file points to money laundering on a scale no lone predator could pull off. It points to a system, and if those numbers were ever truly investigated, the connections revealed could shake the world. But that's only the beginning.
The Trump administration may be trying to close the books on the Epstein sex trafficking. But I want it understood, as a senior member of the Senate Finance Committee, where we spend a lot of time looking at where substantial sums of money are going, particularly if they may be promoting wrongdoing and helping to evade taxes. We are going to stay on this fight to hold the wealthy individuals accountable for the harm that they clearly were involved in injuring the young women and others in this sex trafficking.
Maybe that's the real reason the file remains locked away. Not because it's irrelevant, but because it's too explosive. Tugging on that thread could unravel names and institutions too powerful for the system to confront without tearing itself apart. Meanwhile, survivors are left in the cold. They're told, without words, that the people who enabled their abuse are untouchable. They watch government agencies bury evidence that could validate their stories, and they're forced to face an ugly truth. When predators are wealthy and well-connected, justice isn't delayed, it's denied. But if you thought that was the end, Wyden pushed even further with a question that cuts deeper. What does this say about our society? That accountability only applies to the powerless. That with enough money and influence, the system won't just look away. It will twist itself to protect you, even at the expense of those it was meant to defend.
Have that Treasury information given to the Senate Finance Committee, and have us, on a bipartisan basis, do our work. That's what we do in important investigations. If the Trump people believe they need additional authority to carry out the requests that I make again this afternoon, let me offer to help them write the bill myself.
This isn't just another case of government secrecy, it's a dangerous line being crossed. Senator Ron Wyden isn't letting go, and his demand couldn't be clearer: release the full Treasury file. Not cherry-picked summaries, not pages drowned in black ink, but the real thing. Because here's the truth, numbers don't lie. Follow the money, and you follow the story. Right now, that story is being buried in the dark. If the file were finally made public, this wouldn't be rumor or speculation anymore. It would be hard evidence. Transactions, names, patterns, impossible to sweep under the rug. And that's exactly why the pushback has been so fierce. Once those details see daylight, there's no way to shove them back into the cabinet.
The idea that there is nothing more to investigate, not when you have 4,000 wire transfers, many of them associated with the possibility of wrongdoing and sex traffic promoting. The idea that you have that and there's nothing to investigate when it comes to the Epstein sex trafficking operation is ridiculous.
Here's the danger. If public attention fades, the cover-up wins. The file stays hidden, the powerful stay protected, and survivors are once again left outside, watching their pain ignored. But now, the frustration is boiling over. That's what makes this moment so critical. It's bigger than Epstein. It's about how governments handle predators when those predators have ties to power. It's about whether transparency is real or just a slogan trotted out when convenient. Why is $1 billion paper trail gathering dust in a Treasury vault instead of being torn apart by investigators? And why did Pam Bondi, the Attorney General of the very state where Epstein operated, choose silence instead of demanding accountability?
It's frustrating the American people, and it's exacerbating the mistrust in the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. In February, Attorney General Bondi, 17 days into the job, said in a Fox News interview that the Epstein client list was, quote, sitting on my desk right now to review, end of quote.
And why is a U.S. senator reduced to begging for files that should already be in the hands of oversight committees? None of this is accidental. These are deliberate choices, calculated moves to shield the well-connected.
The Attorney General ought to know better, of all people. Mr. President, I can't begin to understand the President's handling of this or why he thinks this is just going to go away. But I'm here to say that our investigators have spent 3 full years looking into this. And the reason why is because we feel so strongly about the horror of sex trafficking and our commitment to root it out.
When Wyden stood up to speak, he wasn't just addressing senators, he was sending a warning to the public. This fight won't be won in Washington back rooms. It will be won if people keep the pressure on, if they refuse to let the story fade. Files can be unsealed, investigations can be forced open, but only if silence doesn't win. And let's be clear, the evidence already on the table is damning enough. Nearly 5,000 transfers, over $1 billion funneled through shady banks with long records of corruption. Victims trafficked across borders. The pattern is undeniable.
You can't have a much bigger horror in front of you than sex trafficking abuse. So we're talking about real evil done to women and girls by Jeffrey Epstein. And Mr. President, nobody gets to sweep that under the rug. I yield the floor.
Agencies are stonewalling, an attorney general who stayed silent when she should have acted. That's not speculation, it's fact. And it's still being buried. But here's the bottom line. The file exists, the numbers exist, the truth exists. The only question is, will the public demand it or let it stay locked away forever? Because justice for the survivors, accountability for the enablers, and trust in the system itself all hinge on one choice. Do we let the truth stay hidden or do we drag it into the light? That's it for today's video. Thanks for watching.